Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about how to connect to a display that is set up as a DHCP type configuration. So in previous videos, we've discussed that to connect to a display and easily work with it as far as your application development goes, you'll want to connect over Ethernet in some way. So when the displays first arrive from the factory as production units, they are set as DHCP type. They're looking for their IP address from a DHCP server. So they're looking for a DHCP server to give them an IP address. If you come to our support site and look in the knowledge base, we talk about how to change this to be either static or dynamic. Dynamic means DHCP. Static means that you assign the display a fixed IP address. So if we come into operating systems in our knowledge base, there is a article about IP address configuration here. And here it talks about how you can manually go into the display and change it, but this assumes you can connect to the display in the first place. And then there's two scripts down here that will one of them will auto set the IP address to either a dynamic or a fixed IP, and the other one will just reset the display to a dynamic IP address. And this is useful if you've maybe messed up the file, the interfaces file, or somehow created an issue where you can't connect to the display at all. So in this video, we'll be talking specifically about if the display is set as a dynamic IP address and for whatever reason you don't want to change it to a static address. We'll look at how to connect the display directly to your computer and give it an IP address. So if it's set to dynamic, there's a couple different ways you could give it an IP address from a DHCP server. One of the easiest ways is connecting through a router, which we'll discuss in a different video, but essentially you just connect the display to any standard router, and pretty much every router has a DHCP server on it. So the display will be given an IP address from the router. You can find that on the display or by looking in your router settings and then using your computer to connect to that IP address. In this case though, we're going to download a DHCP server onto our computer. So one of the easier ones I found is this DHCP server for Windows. So the address here is www.dhcpserver.de and then /cms. And you can go to download latest version and download it here. So I've already downloaded it. Another good one, if you're interested, is one called Open DHCP. This requires a little bit more know-how as far as configuring, like setting up the right configurations and things, but in general, it's more powerful. It's open source, so there's a lot of benefits to using it, but I found this one to be easier. So when you download it, it actually doesn't need to install anything on your computer. But for me, I've come to apps and in computer applications, I've put it here. And this is the executable file. So I've just created a shortcut to that file here on my desktop. So it's easy to get to. Actually, I think this wizard might be an executable. I don't know. I think that's right. The DHCP wizard is the one I've created a shortcut here for. So right now, my display is in in the dynamic IP address mode, so it's set to receive a IP address from the DHCP server, and I've connected the Ethernet cable from my display directly into the Ethernet port of my computer. So if you're going to do it this way, you will have to come in and change a few things in your settings, in your network settings. So we're going to go to the control panel, network and internet, come to this view network status and tasks, and then change adapter settings. And we'll see currently my local area connection has a network cable, should be plugged in. Might not be recognizing it, but we're going to come to properties and select IPv4 or Internet Protocol version 4 and select properties again, and make sure our use the following IP address is selected. So essentially, if we select this, we're telling our computer that when something's connected to it to obtain its own IP address with a DHCP server. But since we are connecting directly to a display, not a router or something that would hand it an IP address, we need to essentially make our computer's IP address from the Ethernet port static. So we're going to assign it, in my case I've assigned it 192.168.0.1, and it will automatically assign the subnet mask as this. You can just keep it like that. No default gateway, so that's fine. Okay, so once your settings are that, you're going to hit OK and apply those settings. And now we're going to open the DHCP server. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my display. That's probably why it wasn't recognizing the Ethernet cable being connected. Okay, my display is now turned on, and now if I were to just to confirm, you can come back here, come back into the adapter settings, and now you see it's recognizing that I have something plugged in. It's just saying there's a local area connection, but it's an unidentified network, which makes sense because it's not really a network. Okay, so once you've selected the wizard, you're just going to hit next here, and you'll get some options. So you may have different options depending on how many different connections and networks you're connected to. But for me, the one we're looking for is this local area connection. So the direct connection to your computer. And you can see the IP address is correctly set here at 192.168.0.1 that we set earlier. So we're going to hit next. We can skip through this and hit next. And this tells it the IP pool that it's going to use. So this says it can assign an IP address anywhere from 192.168.0.1 to 0.254. So since 1 is taken by our computer, it won't assign 1, but it can assign anywhere else within there. And you want to make sure you have trace set up. And then you can hit next. If this is the first time making these settings, you can write the INEI file. And if it's not your first time, but for some reason you've changed the settings, you might want to overwrite the existing file. So I'm just going to do that and hit next. And then on this section, you can just hit install and start. And this will start the IP address, the DHCP server running on your computer. So for me, I have the default settings screen coming up on my display, so I can see the IP address. So on my display, I can see it's been assigned IP address 192.168.0.2. But if we come and look in our back in our computer applications DHCP file, it creates this DHCP TRC or DHCP trace.txt file. So we're gonna click on this DHCP TRC.txt or DHCP trace, and you can see from this file, mine's quite large because I've connected a lot, so it won't overwrite the file every time. You could delete it though if you wanted to clear it out, and it'll just create a new one. So if we scroll down to the very bottom though, I can see the date and the time that it tried to connect, and essentially I can see what's happening here. So the important part though is right here. It tells you the address it was configured with. So it says this client was configured with this IP address. So if for some reason your display is not connected or not defaulted to the standard settings screen where you can see the IP address that the display currently has, you can always come look in this trace file to see what the DHCP server handed out to the display. In general, as long as you're connecting the same display, it'll mostly assign it to the same IP address. There are certain circumstances where it will change the IP address it gives, but it usually remembers the MAC address and says, okay, I've assigned this IP address to this specific device before, I'm going to attempt to keep that same IP address. So if you're not sure, I would maybe write down the IP address it connects to the first time, and most likely it will continue to assign that IP address to that display. But if for some reason it doesn't, you can look in this trace file. Okay, so the last thing we can do just to test it out is come into PuTTY, or you could also do this in the terminal window of the virtual machine. And we'll do it in PuTTY in this case, and we're just going to type in the IP address, make sure our settings here are port 22 and SSH, click open, and you can see it says login as, so that's good. It means it's connected. We can type root and then SUSE root, and we are in the display. So this has reviewed if your display is set to a DHCP or dynamic setting where it's going to get its IP address from a DHCP server, then this is one of the ways that you can connect it directly to your computer and make sure you're connected to the display. I hope it was helpful, and check out the other videos. Thanks.